Did you know that in 2021, 25% of Canadians and 57% of Americans reported having more mental stress than last year? Stress affects focus, decision-making, follow-through, and ability to see the forest for the trees. Let's bring some calm and order into our lives, shall we? Productivity Toolkit 2022 to the rescue. Our toolkit can bring you a breath of fresh air for better focus, help you organize, and get systematic. You get 12 actionable templates to use immediately, and you're invited to quarterly workshops about how to apply each tool now. With the 2022 Productivity Toolkit, you get 24/7 access to all the templates and tips on how to use them. This year, I divided the toolkit into 4 key themes focused on systems: power of one, power of two, power of team, and the power of scale. I know you will love them. Here's what one customer had to say about last year's toolkit. I thoroughly enjoy your productivity tutorial sessions. They help me bring a lot of improvement to my daily routine. I use some of these tips and the templates with my staff, and we are all the better for it. So get in on the VIP advanced launch by heading over to shiftworkplace.co/productivity tools. That's shiftworkplace.co/productivity tools.
Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Today, I have a wonderful guest to introduce to you. Her name is Jia Li, and she is the managing director at Elite Digital Campaigns, which is a boutique marketing agency that does some really interesting things I'm really excited to get into. Jia is an award-winning entrepreneur, sales and marketing strategist, and a wellness enthusiast. She has a strong background in marketing and media and has spent over 10 years working in the finance and insurance sector, where she excelled in sales, data analysis, and financial modeling. She founded Elite Digital Campaigns in 2017, combining her formidable talents in research, data interpretation, and marketing expertise to deliver tangible business outcomes. Today, Elite Digital Campaigns has marketed over $1.5 billion of services and products, firmly establishing itself as a leading boutique marketing agency with a passion for sales consulting, content marketing, and lead generation for property developers and the finance sector across Australia and Asia. And Jia specializes in developers who build apartments and condos. And we were talking a little bit ahead of time before we started recording, and she said that she started out as doing real estate agent work and thought, no, this is not going to work for me. I'm going to pivot from real estate marketing into bigger clients, bigger cities. And the model really evolved so much so that her very first product is no longer viable, but she's evolved into something that has become extremely successful for her. Did I get that right, Jia?
That is spot on. Thank you, Marie.
Welcome, and thank you for spending the time for the interview.
Yes, and I want to say thank you so much for having me here as well. And as I was explaining earlier, I'm very fond of Canada and Canadians.
Yes, and also coming to Canada, visiting the two extremes of the country, from Montreal to Vancouver.
Yes.
By the time the podcast airs, you will have already had your Canadian experience and be ready to reflect on it.
Yeah, and plenty of poutine along the way, I'm sure.
For anybody who is not from Canada, poutine is kind of considered a national dish from the French-Canadian side of the country, and it is a very high cholesterol event of French fries covered with a special kind of a cheese, curd, and gravy. So it's a favorite, but I wouldn't say it's healthy. Although if you get it in the air-fried version, it is tasty and a little bit less fatty. If you want to try both versions, you could do the judgment later.
Thank you. I will take that tip on board.
So what we heard in your bio was about you as an entrepreneur and your professional life, but give us a little bit of information about you, who you are, what you do, how you ended up being in Australia and then in Berlin and now coming to Canada.
Sure. I guess the personal story is actually very congruent with a lot of other Asians in Australia, the US, and even Canada. My parents are actually refugees from the Vietnam War. So I actually was a boat baby. I arrived in Australia when I was 6 months old after my parents left on a boat from Vietnam to Australia and went on that harrowing journey. So I didn't really understand or had the consciousness to know what has happened. But in terms of my life, it really, the upbringing and the cultural differences and being bilingual really shaped who I am, and obviously had a huge impact on my desire to become an entrepreneur, my work ethic, and obviously now is helping me also become an immigrant a second time, because I was an immigrant to Australia the first time, and now I am living in Germany as an immigrant a second time, but as a fully functioning adult. So that's the personal story. And I guess the professional story would be I started my career in finance and insurance in my early 20s, because that's what all good Asians do in my circle, if you don't become a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer. I was really blessed. I had some incredible opportunities where I was consistently the top performer across Australia in the industry, but I worked really punishing hours, Marie. I'm talking like 60, 70 hours every week, not including commute. But I have to say that working in finance really showed me how egalitarian Australia was. It was really the first time I fully felt what it was to be Australian and living in a democratic society, that through hard work, I could excel. And I excelled not because of politics or the social pedigree I was born into. As they would say, I just outworked everyone. I'm deeply proud of that. But after 10 years, I was exhausted, Marie. When you're working 60, 70 hours day in, day out for 10 years, I hit burnout, and I decided that I didn't want to continue sitting in front of a computer and a desk all the time. I decided to move into real estate because I enjoyed selling, and I thought it would give me more freedom. It was actually in the industry of real estate that I discovered and I noticed that the emergence of digital marketing was playing an increasing role in the way that agents and developers were selling and marketing and displaying their products, right? And I could see that there was a whole generation that was being left behind. They were still using the traditional print methods, which was both ecologically unfriendly, but also resource intensive. And this actually then led me to my business idea of starting Elite Digital Campaigns just over 4 going on to 5 years ago from the front of my house. I remember I had this moment where I thought this could be a business if I was to offer it as a service. I told my colleague about it, and within that afternoon, she said, I have 2 paying clients for you immediately. Come back into the office and execute your plan. And instantly. And I thought, wow, if you have a product and someone is prepared to pay for it, that is a business.
Yeah. For sure.
And it wasn't even just hoping I would break even. I was profitable from day one. There was none of this, whilst we weren't a unicorn, we weren't losing money. And as a sole operator from the front of your house, that's really crucial. I didn't have to borrow any money. I wasn't in debt. And it was just cash flow positive from day one. So from there, we grew really quickly from the front of my house into an office in the CBD. And then something didn't feel right. I think I wasn't really connected to my soul. Everything that I thought would make me happy, working hard, starting a business. I had done all of that, but something was missing, Marie, And during this period, I met my partner, who is German, and my sister had actually moved to Berlin. And so I went to visit her. And at that point, as soon as I stepped off the plane into Berlin 3 years ago, I just fell in love with the city, I fell in love with Berlin. I fell in love with my partner, who's German. But I was running a business in Australia, and it was tough because your commercial side thinks you've got to keep going. That's how you make a living. You've got something good here. You want to keep growing. You want to keep scaling. But my heart was crying. And when your desire is not in alignment, it started to become very challenging. And one of the greatest gifts that happened to me was the advent of the pandemic, because immediately when the pandemic happened, it really made me reassess everything in the business. Clients were putting their projects on hold, and I started communicating more frequently with clients online. And then I just thought to myself, if this pandemic is going to grip the world for the next 2 to 3 years, I'm going to choose happiness, and I'm going to be happy in a city that I love with someone I love, rather than trying to make things work in Australia. And when your desire is in alignment, the universe conspires to help you. And I remember shutting my office down and completely revising my business model. And literally, I went to every single client I had that I decided I wanted to keep with me. And I said, I'm moving to Berlin. Would you like to stay my client? Or this is now an opportunity for you to break up with me if you don't think this is going to work. If you don't think working with me while I'm in Berlin and you're in Sydney or Singapore. And would you believe it, Marie? Nobody left.
How could they? I mean, I'm already a fan, and I've only spent 10 minutes with you. So,
oh, thank you. But you're fearful, right? You're trembling. You're thinking, oh my gosh. Even up until the moment I was leaving on the day, I was still making phone calls to my clients, and every single one of them, they were like so happy for me. They're like, I'm so happy you're doing this. Good on you for following your heart. And it's been a year and a bit now, Marie, and we have not lost a single client either. Mm-hmm. And then on top of the business model, it changes your mindset, right? And because now the business doesn't have those big overheads of having an office and running an office, it means that I can make better decisions around the projects we take on because you're no longer bound by a need. You're then moving into a place of want. So now we only take on projects that really excite my team, these projects that are in alignment with our values. Like we're doing more projects now, which are sustainable based and wellness based developments.
That is the theme of everybody I've interviewed. All the last 10 people I've interviewed, everything's about wellness and sustainability now.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's what's happened. And that's led me to Berlin. So I've lived here for a year now. And I think there is a happy ending,
Yeah. Or a happy beginning. It's like a happy beginning and ending all wound up together.
And it is happy because number one, as a leader of the team and being the person who works with your clients, like I am so happy. Every day I get to wake up in a city I love, logging on, dealing with clients that I really feel so nourished by. And now we're working with some of Australia's and Asia's largest developers. And these were clients I used to chase when I was in Australia.
So now you're not chasing them? Are they just coming to you?
Yeah, they get referred to me or they come back to me after I've chased them for so long. And I'm so humbled by that. So I don't know whether it's because the energy's changed or that the timing is right. So everything has been perfect. And then the team is growing and our retention rate in the business with our team is improved by like 100%.
Well, it is about aligning and changing your energy, coming closer to your heart's desire, taking advantage of the changes in the marketplace rather than saying, woe is me. It's more like, here's an opportunity. But I'm listening to a really interesting book recently, and it's called The 5 Levels of Attachment. And it's about indigenous Mexican tribal teachings that have to do with how, as we become aware of what our levels of attachment are to things that don't have anything to do with who we truly are, and we release them, all sorts of opportunities open up. I really recommend it. I listened to it on audio, and it's just a 2-hour listen, but really impactful. 5 Levels of Attachment. The book is just fresh in my mind. That's why I'm talking about it. You have a conversation with yourself, and you have a conversation with every other living thing on the planet. That's what the book's based on. And so as soon as you have that conversation with yourself and you connect with that personal, authentic self, you open up the ability for the rest of the planet to respond to you. Doesn't that sound beautiful?
It is so eloquent. And I totally agree with you on so many levels. And, Marie, living in Berlin now, I don't have a car. And I'm very sure like across, North America and Australia, we are countries that is very automotive centric. Mm-hmm. So I don't have a car. And for the last year, I haven't had to drive to any place and get dressed up to meet any clients. And there is a place for networking. I totally agree. But for me, because I was so emotionally exhausted by not living my truest values, coming to Berlin, not having to dress up to these networking functions to see and be seen or having coffees with potential opportunities, it really distilled everything to the most important component, that the people who want to work with you because they're in alignment with your values will work with you regardless. You don't need to be there in your Gucci dress, stepping out of the salon to win business. And in fact, Marie, the best clients, we talked about it earlier, the biggest clients, the most successful clients, the truth is, Marie, they're so busy. They only need to know some key salient attributes about your USP and what you can offer. And then they're happy to do business with you.
Short sales cycle is what you're saying.
Very much so. It's so much shorter than I thought it used to be.
Very interesting. Listen, Gia, I'd like to go back a little bit into your beginning introduction and ask you a few questions. The first one is about being a Vietnamese boat person. My burning question is, do you speak French? Does your family speak French?
No, we speak Cantonese.
Because in Canada, many of the Vietnamese that came as refugees were French speaking. So I was just kind of wondering if that was also the case in Australia, but perhaps not.
No, I haven't actually met any Vietnamese who speak French in Australia.
You'll probably meet them in Canada. And I also interviewed another very successful businesswoman. Her name is Catherine, who's won huge awards for being most successful under 30 and then under 40 businesswoman of the year in all sorts of categories. When she didn't apply for it, it just happened. So she and her family came several times by boat and were rejected. You can imagine going through this horrific and treacherous journey of getting on a raft or a boat and going to another country and being sent back home, and how devastating that would be. And as a result, she learned a whole lot of interesting things about being adaptable. Now, you came as a baby, but I'm imagining that you and your parents probably had some of those skills too, of being able to quickly adapt and to pivot as required.
I think agility is really critical. Everyone always has the best laid plans. My life will be like this when I am this age, or, everyone thinks about the perfect plan, but seldom does the perfect plan really evolve, right? So I think staying open to change is really crucial. And I think that's the one thing that I guess that's been easier for me, changing, pivoting, evolving from career to career. That was really important. But I think also is I saw my parents becoming chameleons when they came to Australia, starting, whatever business they could, hustling whatever they could. And if that's what you see, that's what becomes normal to you, right?
Right. So many things stood out from your initial story, but landing in Berlin and feeling like I'm in love with the city, I felt the same way when I went to Berlin. I also felt that way in Prague. I don't know if you've been to Prague, but
not yet.
There's something about this multicultural city that's emerged like a phoenix from the ashes several times, like a city that's been reborn. There's something magnetic about it. I don't know how to describe it, but it's amazing, isn't it?
For me, it's a rebirth of my soul, Marie, coming to the city as soon as I got off. And, remember, I came in Christmas, so it was the peak of Berlin misery in terms of weather, right? It was cold, it was wet, it was grey, but somehow the energy was, like you said, it was magnetic, and the people here were so accepting. They honestly didn't care what you wore. They didn't care where you worked. The only thing they really seemed to care is, do you have an opinion? And are you willing to voice it? And are you willing to defend that position, whether it be aligning with theirs or not? And because it was about their anti-capitalism to a point where you can smell the socialism in the air. And, I'm Australian, and that's
opposite of Australia, isn't it?
It's so opposite to what Australia is. And everything that I was exposed to in my younger years. And what can I say? It really drew me in. And I just kept coming back. It was a place where, David Bowie came in the 70s, and David Bowie famously said that I love the city because whilst people knew he was David Bowie, they left him alone. They didn't even really care he was David Bowie.
Yeah, they didn't go groveling for autographs and selfies and things like that. It's just,
But I think it's also, they have a lot of history here. They've seen war, they've seen devastation, but they've also seen a lot of prosperity. So when a city goes through so much trauma, grief, triumph, it really makes the people more resilient.
And trust who they are and that they're capable.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to go back even further into your childhood. What incidents stand out for you in your childhood and maybe your, adolescence that you think made you into the person you are today? Something milestone-ish.
I talk about this quite frequently to a lot of people. That really stood out to me was when I was probably about 8 years old. I was being taken into the banks for meetings, or if necessary, like the lawyers for meetings, any dealings where I had to be a translator because my parents were illiterate, so they couldn't read or write or speak English. And till today, honestly, they can't. They still can't. So yeah, very formative, to be 8 years old, put in the spot where this was your duty, you had to translate between two parties. That really was very formative because it trained me very quickly to learn how to communicate with people who were in different cultures and also with people who were significantly older than myself. I mean, when you're 8, you're speaking to a 50 or a 40 or even a 30-year-old person that is so much older than you. So I really learned to communicate with people in positions of influence, and it never daunted me to speak with anyone across all verticals in my career from a very young age.
That's a great example. What about in your adolescence?
In terms of what was formative to me?
Yes, yeah.
I think I would have to say that internal debate that I constantly had when you would go to school in the Commonwealth education system, what I really enjoyed was that they really taught you how to think and not what to think. So it was very much around debate, it was around questioning, and that really taught me to voice my opinion, right? Because they really encouraged it. But there was a very big conflict inside me because when I went home, the elders' words were always correct and you never dared to question what they said, even though you knew it was wrong,
right?
Because it was seen as disrespectful. So that was very formative in my adolescence because, you're finding yourself, you're trying to fit in school, you're finding your academic platform, and you're really trying to understand what you're going to be good at. And then at home, you're told, don't question authority. And I would tell my parents, oh yeah, I questioned the teacher today. And they'd be like, how can you do that? The teacher is correct. You're so lucky to have an education. We didn't have an education. Just listen to what the teacher has to say. Leave the debate up to your other peers. They'll get a C and you'll get an A.
Yeah.
So that was very formative and confusing.
Yeah, well, that's a very typical story of parents who were immigrants and the children grew up in the country. They lived with one foot in one world and one foot in the other all the time because there were different sets of rules in each world. And learning to bridge those two was difficult during adolescence, but became a gift later on.
I do see it as a gift now because I've learned to be even more intuitive. And they say that body language can often make up 70% of a conversation, right? So I've learned to pick up on cues very quickly. And I don't know whether it's my intuition, but I've learned to pick up on energy really quickly. Like if a conversation or a negotiation is not heading in the right direction, or if you can feel the discomfort, I tend to pick up on it quicker. It's interesting when I was in conversations with my colleagues afterwards, I'd be like, did you not see that? Did you not sense that? And they were like, no, not at all. I think it went fine. I'm like, that went far from fine.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting because you did have to pick up on the cues when you were growing up and both sides, and then figure out how you would respond. And that gives you negotiating skills that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And I think it also helps you to clarify your values and to say, wait a minute, my value may be respect of elders, but if they're wrong, I'm not going to uphold that wrong decision just because they're my elders. Or you might say they can't handle it. If I say anything to them, it would just cause them to fall apart. I will just support them in the way that I can. And this is the bubble that they live in, and I'm going to respect that. You'd have to choose constantly between those kinds of decisions, I would think.
Constantly.
Yeah.
And also, and even on top of now, we work with property developers, people who have net worths of more than I can ever dream of, billions, but having the gumption to communicate with them and then dancing very, very carefully around egos, because, money at that point for them is no longer just about money, it's about egos.
Yeah. And
how do you keep that relationship intact? So those early exposures has been very formative in what I do now.
So from those groups that you were born into really simultaneously into Vietnamese culture, into an immigrant culture, you're born into an Australian culture, and probably many other groups that surrounded you, because there's just so many. We all grew up in these multiple different group settings. So what would you say has most influenced your sense of culture and self and leadership right now?
Okay, so my parents, their culture is, so they own and they still own a restaurant. So it's very hectic. It's really reactionary, and it's really fiery. And literally I always observed my parents losing their cool and their sense of calmness when things got pressured, right? And I always thought to myself, why? It's such a small thing. Why are you losing your temperament over this? And why are you savaging relationships over something so minor? And I observed that when I was much, much younger. And then in my early 20s, I was really lucky that I actually got to work with my first and probably my most important mentor. He was a self-made multi-millionaire who went to sell his business for over $100 million. And that was in my early 20s. I worked for him for 3 years where I was virtually paid nothing, but I knew that and I saw it as an apprenticeship into business. I actually, from day one, I admired the way he was always steady and consistent in his temperament. And that helped him become a very effective communicator. And I saw the way he can negotiate $1 million contracts and how he endeared himself to people. And like I said, that really was such a huge contrast to the way I saw my parents conduct themselves professionally. But I guess it's also environmental and circumstance, right?
They didn't have any other tools or experience that they could use.
That is correct.
Mm-hmm. And also there's the cumulative stress of running a restaurant day in and day out, which makes for irritability.
Exactly.
Yeah. So then things get blown out of proportion. And so your first large boss that you had, he was perhaps given this gift because of his life circumstances where he could actually reflect on what he was doing and feel that he was controlling what was around him to a certain extent through his relationships and his negotiations, rather than letting the circumstances control him all the time. So you really saw that contrast between the two, didn't you?
It was like day and night. And it was the first time, after university, I worked for this man. And to see him run his business on a daily level where I was basically his executor, I would make things happen. But to see him truly master his emotions, I already made a choice. My parents had always mentored me in their way and said, make sure you get an education, use what you have here, go and get a better life. And this is the best way I can give it to you. And then to further build on that by seeing how this man operated in his business, that really catapulted me into, I guess, the next level of business thinking that I don't think I would have had.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting example. Any other group feeling of belonging that you grew up with that you feel has stayed with you?
I think going to high school was a really big thing. My closest circle of friends are still the ladies that I went to high school with. And interestingly enough, we're all, westernized Asian, and they had their own stories and they had their own journeys. So we really felt very connected. Even now, as, we go on to form our own families, we still talk about, how we were raised and what we were doing in high school and how they're going to do it differently. And interestingly enough, some of us do business together as well. So those circles are very formative and very important and very tight for us now.
Sisterhood.
It really is.
Sisterhood. And also just the Asian tendency to build networks within.
Well, yeah. But an interesting conversation that comes up now is how much are they going to try and influence the outcomes of their children's lives? Whilst our parents wanted us to get an education and to have careers that were steady and stable or more or less guaranteed, interestingly, their conversations pivot around making sure that they help their children fulfill their potential, but not necessarily in the ways that we thought we had to by choosing professions as doctors and lawyers and blah, blah, blah.
And the next level is what would promote global prosperity and the health of the planet.
And you know what? And that's what happens, Marie, because when you raise happy children who fulfill their potential, they can give more and they can provide more.
They're more secure in who they are, and they're able to negotiate, like this book that I've been listening to. their conversation with the planet because they don't have to defend themselves.
Correct. And it becomes a virtuous cycle, right? Instead of this vicious cycle. And coming into living in Berlin, I haven't had a car for the year. And you know how much carbon footprint I've been able to eliminate from my life? Just even one household, right? You know, when we spend the dollar we have, we are voting. We are making a commercial vote for what we believe in. And if we can spread that to the rest of the world, how much impact we can have in decarbonizing the economy.
Yeah, conscious choices about the things that you purchase and how that reflects your values. Actually, it makes me think about the next question I wanted to ask you, because you have moved to Berlin. And although it's fairly early in your stage of being in Berlin, you have a partner who's German, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So are there aspects of German culture or city of Berlin culture that you feel you've started to adapt into who you are and how you see the world?
Yes, I have to say, knowing that my personal actions compounded over time make a huge difference. I used to think, oh, yes, why would I need to consciously have to recycle everything? You know, even the small things that we do compounded over a day, a week, a month, a year, and the waste that we create has a huge effect on the environment. So my partner is constantly reminding me, you know, when we go to get a coffee, let's bring our reusable cup. And I think, why would you even bother? But then I realized, oh my gosh, in Australia, we consume 1 billion, like 1 billion paper cups a year. Marie, that's horrible. Is that how many trees?
Yeah, exactly.
I love the European the German way of thinking that one person can make a difference. And that's becoming more ingrained in me every single day.
That's lovely. I'd like to ask you about the difference between your temperament and your personality. Temperament you're born with. And then, of course, you have social circumstances which influence the growth of your personality. And also the choices that you make and the obstacles you overcome or don't overcome. All of those have to do with your personality development. So what would you say you're born with? What would you say you've added on to?
Well, I would probably say I was born with my parents' temperament, which is also a combination of circumstance. I used to be very easily explosive and my youthful irrationality. And that was obviously my teenage years to my early 20s where I thought I was invincible. And then now, as I am heading into my late 30s and 40s, I've learned to be logical and I've learned to calm myself. I meditate every day. That has been a life and a game changer for me.
It sounds like you've learned to respond and instead of to react, but I'm wondering if the logical piece wasn't already there.
I will probably say I'm logical by nature. I'm fairly logical, but making sure that I don't let my emotions control me has taken a lot of training. And as I said, the most formative period was working with my mentor. To see him make decisions under such stress and not lose his cool. And, you know, Marie, I was privy to his P&L. I was privy to his balance sheet. And, you know, running a business at that level, there was a lot of risk that he was taking. But to see him come in every day, so calm and collected, that really trained me to see life in a bigger way.
You stepped into this bigger picture so you weren't constrained by the small bubble. That was your previous experience.
Yes. And I was so blessed to have that opportunity because I still remember he came up to me one day and he said, I'm looking for an assistant. You know, I heard you're looking for more work. Do you want to do it? I said, yeah, sure. And then he gave me my remuneration package, Marie, and I almost died.
Did you not feel a bit exploited? I mean, if he's a billionaire, he could certainly afford to pay you.
I was already young and poor. So I thought, what have I got to be? I'm young, poor, and inexperienced, but at least I'll be still young.
Yeah, I'm sure you benefited quite a bit from that experience, but it does make me feel a little bit angry about this guy who has lots of money and doesn't even want to pay his intern a living wage.
But you know what? And then we all watched Erin Brockovich, right? We all know what happened in the end.
It all worked out fine because you just had such a good attitude about everything. I'm wondering about that. Was your disposition to look for the opportunities and for the positive side and from what you can learn? Is that you disposition, or was that something that you just learned as you went along, or is it some combination of the two?
I think it was a combination. I think that was definitely like a parent upbringing saying, you know what, if you can do a little bit more, but you know that there's a bigger gain to it in the long run,
go for it.
Go for it. And I think it comes back to then, you know, Marie, I was young, poor, inexperienced, but I had ambition. And then it turned me from being young, poor, and experienced. And then when you are experienced, you don't stay poor very long.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I laugh about it, but look, I wouldn't go back.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I want to ask you about, and I'm sure you have many, because you were already very fluent in showing contrasts and what you learned from both sides of a picture. But I'm wondering about some time that you became aware that your cultural understanding of the world, at whatever point in your life you choose to reveal it, was suddenly thrown into dissonance, and you went, whoa, the way I see things, or the way I always saw things, is not the only way. And you have this culture shock experience. Can you think of one?
I can, and it deeply moves into talking about organizations and culture and psychology. So when I was working in finance, it suited me because it was high-paced, authoritative, and very much about whoever had the results would dictate how the team thinking would work, right? It was very masculine. Look, you know, we've all seen Wall Street, right? Gordon Gekko.
Mm-hmm.
And in finance, in that world that I worked in, it really was like that. Greed was good.
Yeah, it's the hyper masculine to the extreme of moving into the vice becomes the virtue.
Yeah. So when I came out of that environment, because I could no longer sustain that lifestyle, and I started my own business, I continued to lead and manage my team in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was devastating, Marie. My turnover was so high, you know, and I humbly say this now because I think it's really important to look at your failures in the eye, that I lost really good people because I still thought and behaved in that world. And that really shocked me when I wasn't able to keep good people around me. And I thought, well, why? And then, you know, I had some really kind but tough conversations with people who said that this is why you're losing people. It's because you're not empathetic enough.
It's command and control, and it's what I say goes, and just get with the program. May have worked in the past. Not working so well anymore now, right?
It shocked me. It really shocked me, Marie. And, you know, it caused a lot of grief in my business. It really caused me to challenge a lot of my previous thinking. And, you know, when you're faced with this, and I call it, and that's why, interestingly, I call my business my new business. What I have in Berlin is my new business. What I had in Australia was my old business. You know, where I ran my team and I ran the business in that particular way. And whilst outwardly it was successful, but there was a lot of, you know, inner conflict. And my new business, when I came to Berlin, I rebuilt my team, but this time I rebuilt a team with a virtual workforce based offshore. This time, because I was happy in a city I loved, with my partner I loved, everything changed. I started having more time for my team. I was more compassionate. And because we only had to take on clients we liked, I wasn't dealing with circumstances that made me irritable. And now I have to say I have now 9 full-time virtual team members, and every single one of them have stayed with me. I haven't lost a single staff member.
That's a significant change.
Yeah, and I'm so proud of it. And it's because, you know, we don't just work. We're like each other's virtual family.
Do you think this idea that you have to sort of dictate down to people what to do and then force them to bend to your will, do you think that mentality sees empathy as being a loss of standards somehow?
Look, I will defend democracy until my last breath. And it is very sad for me to see this lack of empathy that is happening across the world politically. And that's what I'm saying, like, what's happening in the world is not too far from what's probably happening in our own backyard with our businesses and the way we run our relationships. Yeah, being a dictator, I don't think has any longevity in it.
No, but I think people think that because they're not connected, as you are talking about connecting with your true self and then how things start to blossom as a result, not connected to who they really are. And so they're connected instead, or they're attached to some illusion of who they think they should be. And that illusion that we're attached to sees anybody who's not doing what you want them to do as a threat, because it's not going to be done the way you want it done exactly. It's not a mini you. And then that means it could break your illusion of who you are. And that's a scary thing.
Yeah, and the illusion of who we think we are is really fragile, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we hold it to such high regard. One thing I learned, though, from an ex-staff member that I still remember to today is she said, Gia, you get more bees with honey.
Yeah. People say here, they say you attract more flies with honey than vinegar.
Really?
Although there's some vinegars that are very sweet.
So that really changed my mindset. And I tried it a few times, and she's right.
I think it was Maya Angelou who said, you don't know how much people care until they feel cared for. And then there's the other person who said that people don't remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel. And if you made them feel valued and acknowledged, then they'll walk to the ends of the earth for you. But if you make them feel belittled and small and humiliated, it's not going to go that far.
I am in total agreement with that. There's a way to say everything. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And having a German partner, my partner is very, very empathetic and
very direct. Empathetic and direct.
Yeah,
interesting combination.
And it works. It works. And I remember that also, she's full of wisdom, and she tells me no matter how the conversation goes, you've got to keep in the back of your mind that you want the other party to walk away from that conversation feeling good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that has really changed the way that I communicate now. It's a work in progress every day.
Of course, yeah. So when you are connecting with somebody who's a potential client, what makes it a great relationship? What brings out the best in you?
I would say the 3 C's. Clear communication is really important from a client, with what they want to achieve, what their objectives are, and really concise delivery, with what we do, because there's a creative element to marketing. Getting a really clear brief is really important. And also the relationship, right? If you're not happy, just tell us. Don't dance around it. That's really important to us. But I think the most important part about working with a really great client for us is they have to be engaged, because if you are engaged, it means that we're in a collaboration. It's a partnership, Marie, right? And also if you're charming, that's perfect. If you can
got it. It's 4 C's. Clear, concise, collaborative, and charming.
Yes.
Charming onto the C's.
Because if you can get this right, you know what, Marie, if you can get it right, you can rule the world.
Oh, yeah. I love the charm aspect. So here's your soapbox moment. What would you like to promote?
Well, I know that there are a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs out there in the world that want to be in a more attunement to who they are. And if they're looking for some significant changes in their life, but they feel stalled by fear, I would really invite them to reach out to me, because I think when you speak to other people who are in similar circumstances and that have pulled out on the other side, I want to be there for them. So if they want to reach out, I would love to have a conversation with them about how we can work through to evolve and make some, like I said, to make some significant changes in their life, because their happiness comes first.
Mm-hmm. And that would be for your audience of property developers and financial sector decision makers?
Well, I think there was probably 2 soapbox moments there. The first one is if you have any listeners that aren't property developers and aren't in finance that want to have a conversation around changes, please reach out to me. And on the other hand, if you are a property developer or in finance sector and you are looking for a highly intelligent and creative digital marketing agency that can help you generate leads and sales, then I would be the person that I would love to have a chat with you.
That is perfect. So is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I think if there was like one more last thing that I can part with your guests is the biggest thing that I've learned is I no longer judge the outcome of my day by the quantity of tasks that I achieve. But now I think we need to judge the quality of our day by the quality of decisions that you make.
Mm-hmm. Quality of decisions that you make. That's a great way to end. Thank you so much, Gia, for this wonderful window into your life and your thinking and your soul. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marie. It's been really beautiful being able to share that with you.
Gia Lee has lived a life of contrasts and negotiations between worlds that did not know how to communicate with each other. She experienced the world of refugee Vietnamese parents, focused on respect of authority, making something of yourself, and collectivist wisdom, together with the world of Australian individualism, challenge of authority, and self-expression. A keen observer of people and life, Gia has been able to pivot and adapt, taking the best of one life experience into the horizon of possibility as new opportunities present themselves. I thoroughly enjoyed my interview with Gia and love her self-awareness and deep honesty. It is a gift to hear her share her life's journey so openly, and I hope you felt, as I did, a deep kinship with Gia and her beautiful soul. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing the podcast with people you think would enjoy it, and may culture and leadership connections continue to guide and inspire your day.
This podcast would not be possible without the expertise of our Culture and Leadership Connections production team. A big thank you and shout out to Mike Kurlander for audio production and editing, to Malvika Kathpal for the show notes, Bernadette Guadiz for online web and social media management and promotions, Celine Bayogo for design, and Kirsten Hoyer for website and branding. Thank you so much.